chemicals and pollution reporter at POLITICO. For the next 45 minutes, we're going to be looking at one of the arguably more overlooked aspects of the triple planetary crisis, pollution. Its effects aren't always as visible as the destruction wrought by climate change or biodiversity loss, but they are there. Air pollution accounted for over 8 million deaths globally in 2021, making it the second leading risk factor for death. The EU's rivers and lakes are slowly turning brown, according to the European Environment Agency's most recent report on water pollution, and most of the EU's protected fish and amphibian species risk becoming extinct. There's also mounting concern about the health effects and omnipresence of forever chemicals. So what can the EU do to address all of this while also forging ahead with a renewed push to protect and boost EU industry and competitiveness? We have two expert MEPs from the European Parliament's Environment Committee with us to help unpack that. I also have good news for those who are following the discussion in person. There will be time to ask a few questions later on, so please start thinking about what you would like to ask. And I have a disclaimer from our events team who reached out to 7 MEPs in the Renew and ECR groups too, but none were available to join this discussion. I'm now very happy to welcome our distinguished panelists on stage. With us, we have Radan Kanev, a Bulgarian MEP from the European People's Party, who led work on the EU's incoming industrial emissions directive in the last mandate, and Lina Schilling, an Austrian MEP who is new to the European Parliament, but is well known for her climate activism in her home country. Thanks so much for joining us today, both of you. Let's get right to it. Both of you are obviously aware of the pollution crisis facing the EU and the world. In 30 seconds, can you sum up what you see as the key challenges for this current mandate regarding the EU's quest to reach zero pollution by 2050? Maybe we could start with Radan.
In 30 seconds, it won't be easy, but let's give it a try. First of all, I would be a bit more unconventional and say that Europe has achieved really a lot in fighting pollution during the last 30 years. I come from a country which had virtually no environmental legislation against pollution 30 years ago. And we have a number of industries polluting 10 to 30 times less today than they did 20 years ago. Speaking of pollution crisis, I wouldn't ever deny that it's a serious challenge, but it's the domain in environmental policies where we have done our best. Compared also to any possible global competitor, while remaining competitive in those industries who have, I would say, even outperformed during the last decades. So what we need to do in 30 seconds is to keep the pace. I wouldn't do any radical moves, especially in this domain of environmental policy. But go on, of course.
Lena, you don't seem entirely convinced. You were shaking your head a bit there. What's your response?
Yes, so first, thank you so much for the invitation. And I think it's very important that we talk about pollution in a way where we connect the crisis we have. We have, as you mentioned, a triple planetary crisis. We have the loss of biodiversity, we have the climate crisis, and we have to deal with pollution. And pollution is not just the waste we are seeing, pollution is also the air pollution. It's also harmful to our own health, to our children. There is so much we need to work on. And I think keep the pace is something where I'm not happy with, because there is even now, legislation from the last term missing when we talk about REACH, as example, and about PFAS and so on. And I think that's the first step. Of course, we need to even go steps ahead, because if it would be great, as you mentioned, and we were already there, we would not be in a triple planetary crisis, but we are. And I think it's important to not just tackle it in this mandate, but also connect it. So we are waiting for the Circular Economy Act, as an example. And I think that's the most important thing to say in 30 seconds. We need to take it seriously. There is a crisis, and we will talk about it. And second, also work on this legislation in a way where we can connect it with chances, because in the Circular Economy Act, it would also be a chance to improve products, to make us even better. And I think that's great, and that's what we should do.
And what do you make of the EU's renewed push on competitiveness and boosting industry? And do you see a way of reconciling forging ahead with pollution, as you say, while also trying to boost industry, and how to do that?
I think we all hear the word competitiveness quite a lot these days. And the question is, what does it mean, and how do we think about competitiveness? Do we want to be like the best when we talk about businesses and starting where the pollution has its source, like in the industry? Do we want to make our companies better and cleaner? Do we want to create new green jobs and find a way of being competitive in this world and go a path ahead? As we always say, the EU is the leader, and sometimes that's true, but sometimes and often enough we are not. And that's the first thing. And I think second is we should not just say these big words without explaining what we mean. And I think competitiveness is often used for we need to go on faster with our industry, and we will not think about like the Green Deal anymore, or we will not think about the crisis we're in anymore. And that's just not responsible. And I think that's what we need to be. We need to be responsible in time of crisis, and we have now the decision if we want change by design or change by disaster. And I would prefer design.
Roland, what would be your response to that?
I would first agree with my colleague that we tend to hide behind euphemisms in Brussels English, and that competitiveness has become the word to explain everything last few weeks, to be replaced by another word in a few years, I assume. But I take the competitiveness question seriously, and that's why I would simply like to explain what I understand, and I hope a number of other policymakers nationwide or EU level understand. It's quite simple. It's keeping our jobs and growth and keeping our purchasing power. Because we live in a political environment where the anxiety that European industries are closing and our purchasing power is rapidly decreasing is causing a huge surge of political forces that would happily stop any green endeavor. And in order not to fall into this trap, we need to really think competitiveness in economic terms, which means to have incomes relative to those on the other side of the Atlantic, vis-à-vis prices relative to those on the other side of the Atlantic, and yes, be in pace or catch up where needed in a number of new technologies that we usually consider green. Such as electric cars or electrolyzers or renewables, etc., etc.
There are hopes that the Clean Industrial Act is going to address some of those concerns that you mentioned. Do you think that this act, as has been pushed by some civil society groups, really needs to also have a focus on pollution, and clean not merely being climate neutrality, but also addressing things like air pollution and chemical pollution within this upcoming act?
Clearly, yes. As with the Green Deal, regarded as legislative package, we have, of course, in the Clean Industrial Deal, the clean word, which means at least that it will aim at further cleaning our industry. And here, of course, the chemical legislation that Lena mentioned is on the top priority list. It will be part of the Clean Industrial Deal. We will most probably not agree on many details when it comes to the legislation proper, but we certainly don't argue about the need of developing our chemical legislation. So simple answer is yes, of course. As I said, we need to keep the pace, and our pace is decreasing pollution. What we don't need is close industries because they don't achieve zero pollution. That's a very painful thing to say, but I don't hesitate to say it. We're technologically far, far away from the concept that we might have heavy industry which is zero polluting. It's not invented till now. We hope we might see it, but for the moment it's impossible to say we'll have a new mining project and it will have zero pollution effect, zero environmental footprint. This could not happen. Or a new, let's say, battery gigafactory, which has zero environmental footprint, or a new chemical factory, or reduce an existing chemical factory to zero pollution. That's not possible. But of course, we need to keep the pace as fast as we can, because it's, once again, I will fully agree, it's a matter of health and life. I live in a very, very polluted city in the capital of Bulgaria, Sofia. And I know what is to see air pollution having direct effects on your child's health.
And, when it comes to the Clean Industrial Act and upcoming regulation, what would you like to see prioritized, especially when it comes to pollution?
I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to need a strong Circular Economy Act. So what we also will need is talking about industries and the way we produce things. And I agree with you, we have to keep the jobs, but we have to also create new jobs in many other fields, because we will need technology, but also like repair stations as an example. And in this Clean Industrial Deal, I really want to see Europe as a leader, as we always mention. What does that mean? That must mean, in my common sense, that we work on the improvement of clean technologies, but also a clean industry. And we will now decide, hopefully, on clear dates, on clear paths, and that's also something companies can follow. And I think what we're seeing in many, in the transport sector and the big discussion about cars that's going on the whole time, we're starting to change, or some people want to change dates. And for that's also not good for the industry, because then we have not a clear path. And I think that's the key point, to now commit. And I think on the details, what we need is commitment to really tackle these problems. And I agree that there will be differences, but what we need is that we decide now together that we want to do this. And therefore, I have to admit, sometimes I'm not sure if all parties want to do that. And I think what's so strange about it, and I will make a short note on a more personal side, because I think when we're talking about pollution, it could be so easy, because when we're reading books to your children, then we tell them, don't throw waste away, protect the nature, be kind to animals, and then we grow up and we create a world that is devastating and turns all of these basic values we want our children to have down. And when we talk about this complex legislation, and I think that's necessary, we should always keep in mind why we are doing this. So what I want to see is braveness in this Clean Industrial Act.
And you mentioned cars earlier, and you're referring to the combustion engine ban and pushes from within the political group, the EPP, to change those dates. Radan, do you support backtracking on these kind of elements of the Green Deal in the name of competitiveness, and despite the potential impacts on air pollution?
Oh, here it's a point that we certainly disagree, because I was very much against the so-called diesel ban in the previous legislature. Anyway, so I am not backtracking from my position, just keeping it. It's a kind of philosophical question, I would say, on the approach to the results that we are looking for. And it's obviously no coincidence that I come from the center-right. Me personally, I would say quite right-wing on economic issues. And my colleague comes from the green side, so we have different views on how the world develops. And in my opinion, a regulatory ban on certain technology makes no sense whatsoever. Because I've heard a number of arguments that it's needed because market will lead us there anyway. But if market will lead us there anyway, then we don't need it. I consider it very clear. But if market doesn't lead us there, that's the more important point. Should we impose it by virtue of legislation? And my answer is no. I would say unfortunately, but still no, because once again, I come from the region of Central Eastern Europe, and unfortunately from the less wealthy country within this region. And I can easily say that for Bulgaria, for example, but absolutely valid for Romania, I would say easily for Greece as well, and a number of other countries, the diesel ban will simply lead to the increase of very polluting diesel engines within our territory. It will raise the air pollution, and significantly, especially when it comes to the heavy-duty vehicles, because people don't have either the mindset or the financial means to switch to electric vehicles. It won't happen. It simply won't happen in this period that we are considering. So they will buy the old diesels of those who would. So the cars from Germany, from Netherlands, from Sweden. And they will drive them as long as possible because they're not allowed to buy new ones anymore. So it could have, what happens in politics very, very often is that with the best intentions, we create very dangerous so-called pervert effects. Adverse effects. And in Central Eastern Europe, I'm certain that the diesel ban would lead to such unintended and very detrimental to the environment and to health effect, also to the economy in a way.
Just want to go to Lina to respond.
I understand your concerns, and at the same time, I completely disagree on many points.
So I thought.
Pretty obvious, no? I think first, we're seeing and debating about a planetary crisis. We know the transport sector is one of the sectors where the emissions still increase. And as European Union, we have the commitment to decrease the emissions. So we need to do something. That's maybe the first step. Otherwise, we would be not coherent. So I think that just the coherent thing is to talk about the transport sector and how to decrease the emissions. And then we have to talk about what other ways of transport we can build and what we need to do to support people in their everyday life because they need to get to work. I understand all of the arguments. And I think at the same time, there are 3 reasons why we not just need this ban, but also should speak about other parts. Because first, of course, we need to work on like the public transport in Europe. That's something we're talking, I think, longer than I'm alive about. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is, of course, we need the change in the car industry, because if we want the people to keep their jobs and if we want to decrease emissions, we're gonna have a problem. So, and if we look, we always say it, like in China, the e-cars, it works. And also, I will say e-cars are not just the solution, but a part of the solution. So there are other solutions like public transport. We can talk about like the corporate e-fleets and so on. Like there are many topics we have to tackle to really speak about the problems of the people and the industry, but there are options. And third, I think, which is a bit strange when we are always talking about the market and if the market will deal with it or not, we're in a crisis that is endangering the future of our children. We are seeing in Europe, also in Middle East Europe, the floods, the droughts, we are seeing the wildfires, the climate crisis is happening right now. And still we are telling, we will see if the market will do it on its own. I think that's just wrong. We need to take responsibility there and act upon it. I think that's, as politicians, we need to work on these solutions and accept realities. And the climate crisis is a reality, and that we need to change the industry, in my opinion, is also a reality.
Would you like to respond, and then I'll go on to my next question?
We risk to spend
our
time. Of course, we can, and I'm sure we will continue to argue. So.
Yeah. Well, I think my next question was going back to reopening these pieces of Green Deal legislation. Are people right to be concerned about the precedent that this may set for all of the legislation set on pollution in the previous mandate, not just the combustion engine ban, but you also worked on the Industrial Emissions Directive, and I think there was also a push to reopen that in the final stages of it being approved. Is that dangerous at this stage to start reopening these pieces of legislation?
So speaking concretely on the Environmental Emissions Directive, it's not on the reopening list. I saw with great satisfaction that it's not on the cutting the red tape list, because we've done the cutting while negotiating in the Parliament, so no need to reopen it to cut further. But it was a really very, very, allow me to not be very humble here, but a very good balance between competitiveness of our industry and still a very high environmental ambition. It's not by coincidence that at the end of the day it was supported from Greens to Conservatives inclusive in the Parliament, exactly because of this balance. It's not the case for many other legislations. However, don't get me wrong, I'm not in favor of massively reopening closed legislative files. We need to be very careful here, because otherwise the whole construction of the Green Deal might fall apart, and that's not what we need. That's far from my views. On the other hand, I still think there are elements that we need to revise in order to sustain the construction. And as became obvious, I think the diesel ban, especially on heavy-duty vehicles, you reiterate once again, is one of those elements. But we have a much bigger elephant in the room, and it's called the ETS2. And here once again, it's not a party line. EPP supported ETS2 really strongly in the previous term. I would say maybe the political group that was strongest in its support. I still voted against, and as of today, I'm much more convinced than I were 2 years ago that with ETS2, especially if we don't strengthen the so-called emergency brake on 40 euro per ton CO2 for heating and transport, we are heading full speed for political disaster. And I will say only one thing. We have ETS2 entering into force 1st of January 27, and then somewhere April, May, we have the French presidential elections. And if we don't reconsider the ETS2, I can tell you the name of the winner. And I don't like it, frankly. I know the lady, and I don't want to see her president of France.
Okay. Do you want to? You've got some support. Lena, would you like to reply?
Yeah, maybe just to raise a question, because I think like when we're talking about ETS2, that's a market-based solution. That's one of the solutions EPP mostly supporting. So you don't want ETS2, you don't want much more regulatory on the clean industrial deal that goes in like this green direction. So what do you want? What is your solution for the pollution problem, the climate crisis problem? Because just saying we don't want it and people don't like it, or that's not enough. So what is your solution for the climate crisis?
It's a good question, that because you said climate crisis and pollution. On pollution, as I said, I'm rather ambitious, and I hope we keep being ambitious. On climate, we need ambition too. But if we see the path is not acceptable to the voters, then we need to assume it won't work. So it won't solve the climate crisis. As you said, yes, ETS, for example, is considered market-based solution by many of my pro-market friends in the EPP. It's a concept I have never accepted. There's nothing farthest away from the market than the so-called ETS market. Still, ETS for energy and industry works decently in Europe, and as you see, I don't object either to its existence nor to its expansion under the revised ETS directive, although there are a lot of details that will need fixing, both on ETS and on CBAM, the mirroring legislation. But as I said, when it comes to heating and transport for households, here, yes, we need different measures. And they might be even in the domain of direct financing. even in the domain of taking more debt, which is, of course, not a happy perspective, but it might be needed. But I don't think that the market mechanism will work here, but it will have a devastating political effect. Yes, something that we won't agree once again, if we need to postpone those measures a bit to take a more gradual approach when it comes to heating and transport, maybe we should take it by purely political reasons, because we still live in a democracy, and we see that the very simple and, in my point of view, I assume in yours as well, untruthful message of the far right, that the Green Deal is causing the purchasing power crisis, is having a very strong political effect. So it gets to voters, and it is a legitimate message. It might be untruthful, but it is not a fraud. We always say strong things when we go to elections, and those by the far right do resonate very strongly. At least they did in European elections 24, but much more concerningly on a number of national elections. So we need to keep in mind that risk, because once we have let's say, a far-right majority in our national parliaments, France, Germany, wherever, we're done with the Green Deal. It's there where it stops, and obviously the climate crisis will worsen and not improve.
I agree on that point, and I think it's necessary to take the people with us on this path and find solutions that work for a lot of people. And now I heard you talking about transport and heating, and I think that's two topics we can work on together. But what I'm lacking in these discussions often is that EPP is telling, we can't do it, it's not working, we will not do it, and it's just the lack of political commitment. And of course we need to face also the problems that people have in their daily life. Of course that's what we do. But at the same time, we can't just say, we will wait or we will delay regulations we deeply need. We are not doing this political stuff because we like negotiating so much, but really not. But there is a big need to improve our society in the European Union, also in a sense of competitiveness, to mention that word once again. We love buzzwords. No, but really, and I think that's sometimes sad, because when you're talking about your perspective on what you want to do on pollution, on the climate crisis, on biodiversity, we can deal with much more, I think, than just telling ETS is not working and this is not working. And I think some parts are true. We need to improve some points. But it's more like on a common sense, we really need braveness and commitment, also for the next generations.
We've got 10 minutes left. I just wanted to open the floor to a few questions. If you just want to put up your hand. There's
a question.
Hello, there's a microphone that's roaming around somewhere. Thank you very much. Just over that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Simone Schepper. I work for the Austrian credit agency ÖKB. You mentioned today that the current path is not acceptable to the voter because it is presented, I think, at member states levels often in a negative way. And rather than presenting to people the business and job opportunities and the chances for a livable future, we offer very often limited incentive schemes for companies that in fact would like to act bold. So we know there's also the challenge of regulatory burden on companies. Very much needed simplification is now being promised. My question is to Lena Schilling. To what extent do you think is the focus on competitiveness and clean industry of the new Commission in fact to the advantage of coming closer to green transition in member states, particularly to secure their buy-in?
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and I think it's very true that it's also often in our national contexts where we talk about things from the Green Deal, everything that isn't working, but not often about the things we are succeeding in. To get to the question, I think yes, talking about this industrial Clean Deal can and should also improve our competitiveness. And we're talking a lot about simplification, and I understand the need of the companies, and I also understand that we need to talk about simplification without destroying regulations. And I think that's the most important thing, to not just say we're gonna work on simplification and then cut all the legislation out there and then just have a word there. I think we really, really need to deal with both of these sides. And what I would like to see is going this path along in a sense that we're also taking the young people with us. Because when you're mentioning now, like the industry and the companies, young people need also jobs. And what I'm facing in my personal field is that, of course, in times of the cost of living crisis, in times where it's not easy to think about in which future we will live, that's something we are also aiming for. And I think there we can be partners, because, of course, whatever this competitiveness means, then we will see the legislation that will come up. We need to see it as a chance, and also as a chance for young people to vision a future that is livable and support companies on these bold actions. So that's something I can agree on.
Would you also like to respond, or to respond to what Lina was saying?
Yeah, sure. I started on a very positive note, saying that we have decreased pollution so effectively during the last few decades and with such great results. So I will try to be positive at the end once again. I think the Clean Industrial Deal gives a lot of opportunities. We can really move quite faster than we assess, let's say, in the present rather grim political situation that we live in. Most people are feeling pessimistic. I think most politicians are also feeling pessimistic. Yet I think the way we spent the next generation EU, or I call it recovery and resilience facility money, was so ineffective, and yet gave quite some positive results. So we can make a very, very serious evaluation of what happened. And we can think of next moves to financing both our industry and our transition at the same time in a much more effective way to really achieve real competitiveness, to end up with products produced in Europe which are greener, with much less environmental footprint, either pollution or greenhouse gas emissions, and cheaper. Because more competitive at the end of the day, especially in more dire economic times as now, means cheaper, or at least with a better price-to-quality ratio than now. I think it's absolutely achievable. What we need to think is really to use the scarce financing that we will have in a most smart and targeted way, to develop smart financial instruments that we don't possess at the moment, and we don't possess it because we did not create it. Here is my main answer to a question that Lina had a round ago, that what should we do, for example, for heating and transport. What we certainly can do is focus on the most effective financial instruments for housing renovation, because it will have a tremendous climate effect, and it will reduce households' expenses instead of increasing them. So we have somewhere to go, but if we think, as my government thinks in Bulgaria, that we need to renovate all the homes in the country with 100% free grants, we'll obviously go nowhere. I made a calculation that under the actual Bulgarian state policy, the building stock will be renovated in 2,153. So these buildings won't exist by then, obviously. we obviously need a much more flexible approach. The same goes for industry. We need to have money turning, to use financial instruments instead of grants, to finance transactions instead of the eternal question, should we finance demand or supply? It's the most stupid question ever invented for anyone who understands something from economy. The only workable financing is financing of a transaction where demand and supply have already met. And we can do this easily.
Thank you. Is there another question from the floor? Yeah, there's just one person over there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if we start with you and then we can go to you, I'm sorry. I think there was a
Apologies.
misunderstanding.
Hi, and thank you very much. Sarah Abitbol from the European Public Health Association. My question is very simple, and it's to both of you. Do you intend to include the One Health approach in the next text that will come out, and how do you intend to do so? And the second aspect of it is also using the buzzword competitiveness. How do you see that we can use this really amazing concept, in my view, of One Health and leverage it for competitiveness? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we start with Adan and then go to Lina.
Yeah, simple answer is yes, and I think it's something that we have already discussed, and one of the few topics that we have easily agreed already. That, for example, when fighting pollution, we are enhancing the health of our citizens, and it's no secret, nor a stereotype, but simply a fact that a healthy population is much more productive and consecutively much more competitive. And obviously we work better and we work longer when we are in a proper health. So I think it's a clear priority.
Lina?
Yes, of course. As a group, we're supporting the One Health idea and trying also to promote it everywhere where we can. I think connecting health with competitiveness, I understand it, and at the same time, I'm feeling like it's just necessary. We need to create a healthy society for ourselves. That's like the key priority, is that we want a society where people are healthy, just because people have their own worth. So I think we should not, I think there are parts where we can use competitiveness, but I would really like to keep it as one of the values we are fighting for, because as we all want our families to be healthy, I want the people in the European Union and everywhere to be healthy, and I think that's just, again, a question of responsibility more than competitiveness.
Thank you. And then there was a question over there in the middle. I'm afraid I can't see you very well, but I think it's somebody in a white collar shirt.
Yes, thank you. Tom Vasseur from the Cool Heating Coalition. I have a question related to the ETS2. You were talking about the potential backlash on that because of the carbon pricing. Now, there was the Social Climate Fund created next to the ETS2 to help mitigate that. That it's partially funded from the ETS2 revenues, but it's capped at 65 billion euros. Would you then, next to maybe strengthening the cap, also support lifting that cap on the Social Climate Fund so that you actually solve also the financing issue, that you partially finance the issue that you addressed as well?
Yes. When we argued within EPP, it was quite a debate on ETS2. At a certain point, a representative of the high-level party leadership, I won't cite names, anyway, asked me directly, so do you agree to have no ETS2 and so to have no social climate fund? With the idea that it was putting me in a very difficult situation to answer, but it was the easiest answer I ever gave. I said yes. I don't see the point if either ETS2 or the social climate fund. For the simple reason that the philosophy of both is that we take some money from consumers and then give them back part of it. And your question is, what if we take some money from consumers and then give them back all of it? I still don't see the point, frankly, and especially because on its way from consumers back to consumers, it goes through the pockets of the governments, and I know them to be deep and sticky. So it won't be the same amount coming back even without the cap.
Thank you. Lina?
I think it's not a question about philosophy. We're talking here about money, and that's pretty materialistic. And I think the key point is we see that ETS and these trade schemes, they are working, and we also see like the studies in which grade, when they start working and so on, it's basic science, I would say. So yes, I think it's necessary even to improve it. In Austria, we have also ETS already and a social climate fund. And I think what the key point about is not taking money from people and then giving them back, but tax on emission. And what we are seeing is like people that have much more money drive bigger cars, they pay more, and other people give it back. So it's also connected with a social question a bit. And I think that's something we can even improve a bit more. But yes, of course, we need ETS in my opinion, and I think we will work on it, and I hope the EPP will support it in the end.
Unfortunately, I'll have to react here because I strongly disagree. In my personal experience, more wealthy people drive better cars, which have less consumption. And people who are poor drive old cars with very high fuel consumption. And this is some of the sad story behind the question of the transport, but also heating transition, that wealthy people have already afforded themselves both electric cars and very efficient heating systems, whereas poor people are still using highly ineffective means of transport and heating, and there is where we need to focus the financing to help poor people to move towards more effective means of especially heating.
But I have to step in there. That's just not true. We can see in the whole European Union and also in the different countries that wealthier people are emitting more emissions. I can show you afterwards like a lot of studies that are done. That's just a fact. Okay.
I'm only talking transport. I assume you're right.
Okay, unfortunately we're running out of time, but it's been very, I think it's been a productive conversation. Thank you both of you for your time and valuable insights. I think it's given the room a lot of food for thought on how to chart the way forward on the EU zero pollution aims and competitiveness. I will be asking the attendees to remain seated. In a few minutes, I will be moderating the panel discussion, Chemically Yours, Reviewing the Block's Chemical Future, where we'll be diving deeper into how to fix the EU's chemical safety framework. So I just want to say thank you again to Raden Kanev and Lena Schilling for your time. Yeah, I'll see you shortly.